with a story. There's a giant in the neighborhood who is powerfully armed and growingly rich. Well, it has a record of bullying around his neighbors in the past. The problem is that this giant, in the past 10 years, has become the banker of everybody else. What to do? Well, find another giant in another neighborhood, invite him. That giant is even richer and more powerfully armed. So far, that giant is quite willing to help. However, that giant has problems at home. Therefore, the resolve of the second giant to help in the long run may not be sustainable. At least it is uncertain. What to do now? There's another solution. Find a small neighbor of the first giant who happens to be a relative of the first giant. It is small, but it has a lifestyle which is the envy of the first giant. How can the small neighbor influence the big giant? Well, the big giant has a health problem now. If untreated, the head will no longer command the limbs in the long run. Well, the small neighbor had this problem before and has cured it. So the small neighbor has the cure. Let's look at the facts. So that is the story. And the big giant is China, of course. The second is the United States. The third is Taiwan. Well, let's look at what happened in late July. Big riot. And this time, something unprecedented happened. The people in riot stripped the leader of the city, the party chief, naked, out of anger. Well, this is only the top of an iceberg. The number of riots has been growing incessantly. You could see in 2010, it's 180,000, and it has increased threefold in 10 years. Now it is more than 200,000. So the Beijing leaders are worried. In fact, they have been worried for a long time. Hu Jintao, the top leader of China, urged political reform on July 23rd. And the mouthpiece of the government, Ren Yibao, even called for transparency, as Admiral mentioned. They lack transparency. The lack of transparency is one of the big problems of this rising number of riots. Even last year, on the 1st of July 2011, during the situation of commemorating the founding of Chinese Communist Party for the 90th year, Hu Jintao already urged political reforms. He mentioned political structural reforms 3 times, as opposed to what people usually think he did not mention. No, he did. He also said something very seriously. He said, dealing with corruption, we must sternly punish it and effectively prevent it from happening. This will affect if people are with or without against us, and whether the party will survive or perish. The problem of the survival of the party is at stake. Now, after the Bo Xilai incident, Bo Xilai was for a Maoist type of governing, and he has lost power since mid-April. After that, the top leadership in China has come to a very difficult consensus. That is political structural reform, or perish. Political structural reforms, well, that's easy said than done. It's very risky, because if Beijing does not do it at a steady pace, it may upset the entire power structure of the Communist Party. So it needs previous experience. Where does it look for? Well, let's turn the stage to another actor. That is the United States. As mentioned by the Admiral, the United States wants to help us. It has announced air-sea battle. It has announced a pivot to Asia it also has announced rebalancing of its deployment. Well, this was announced by Secretary of Defense Panetta in June this year. The proportion of deployments between the Atlantic and the Pacific will be readjusted to 6-4 Pacific over the Atlantic. Well, the problem is political paralysis in this second big giant. Take Alan Simpson, for instance, a very seasoned Republican senator, statesman, I should say, lamented that no one forgives anyone for anything anymore because he was invited by the Democratic President Barack Obama to be the co-chair of a commission to deal with the deficit problem. And he said, it isn't just Congress. Congress is a microcosm of America. So the two parties cannot work together. And take another instance, to another example, to Richard Lugar, many of you know, who is a moderate Republican who is for cooperation between two parties. Now he has lost out to a radical candidate from Tea Party. And another problem is economic stagnation. The red ink is huge, 10% of income of every year. This was only in 2010, now it's even more serious. So President Obama announced that the US defense budget must be cut for $500 billion over 10 years. However, it may double and it may even triple. Why? By November this year, if the two parties cannot agree on lifting the ceiling of the deficit, it will double. Later on, if they still cannot agree, it will triple. So what does that mean? It means that the military budget for the second giant to be involved in our area will be in question. And people in the United States have already started to question this pivot, this rebalancing, and the new arrangement, because the new arrangement is not supported financially by the outlook of its economy. For instance, the leaders in strategic studies have called for closing bases around the world. Now, a third problem is the society is ill. For instance, 6 million people in prisons are in the United States, more than the Gulag population under Stalin. The United States have 5% of world population, 25% of world's prison population. The society is sick. And the gun violence is rising. 30,000 deaths a year and 86 deaths per day, people shot by gun. And also the income gap is widening. For instance, the top 1% of the society in terms of income has grown 281% from 1970 to now. And the opportunity for poor people to move up is sliding. The United States is here, Denmark is here. And even more, 85% of college graduates move back home. They don't work anymore. So, can the United States sustain its expanded presence in East Asia for long? It seems increasingly uncertain. We hope they will manage the problems to help us, but we have to be objective, to be realistic for our own future. Now look at Taiwan. The inflow of tourists from China is growing rapidly. And by 2010, 6.3 million, but now the number is even higher, and the number per day is growing, which is a government policy. However, when tourists from China come to Taiwan, they usually spend a night in a hotel room. Their eyes are glued to the TV screen, watching people criticizing their government. They found it very, very curious. They are also very envious. They wish their own people could do that. And students from China to Taiwan are saying they will bring their Taiwan experience back home. These students will be the leaders in China in 10, 20, 30 years. So the seeds of democracy and freedom in Taiwan are already in their brain. It will bud. It will blossom one day. For China, not only tourists, but also scholars and officials who come to Taiwan are impressed. For instance, at the end of 2009, there was a General Li Jijun, who commanded 38th Group Army before 1989, who came and commented when he was leaving. He was very impressed with the caliber of the citizens. In comparison to whom? He didn't say, but that is very clear. So officials, scholars come, then absorb the Taiwan experience back home. Well, this is the term, catalyst. It is small in amount, huge in effect. It itself remains unchanged. Taiwan will play the role of a catalyst for China's reforms. Taiwan enjoys peace at home and behaves peacefully with other neighbors. This is also a religious concept, right? Peace within, there's peace in the world. And Taiwan has it. When China learns to have peace at home, it is when China behaves peacefully with the world. Few democracies have launched wars against each other. Dr. Michael Doyle has done intensive research. From 1900 to 1945, very, very few democracies fought with each other. From 1945 to 1990, none. From 1990 onwards, a few poor, newly emerged democracies waged wars. But when a democracy is well settled, rich, it is almost impossible to launch war against another democracy. For the United States to contain China, it may not be sustainable. To stop China from rising, it may not be possible. To help a rising China to change its nature towards peace, it may be possible. Thank you.
네, 감사합니다.